Have you ever noticed this moment? After a long day, when your mind is still crowded with noise, you sit down, and your cat quietly appears. No calling, no demands, no need for you to do anything at all. Why can such a simple presence calm you so quickly? Why does your breathing slow down, your shoulders soften, and your thoughts stop running in endless circles? According to research in psychology and neuroscience, many people who love cats tend to be more sensitive to environmental stimulation. They get tired more easily from constant reactions. They are more prone to overload from noise, pressure, and invisible social expectations. So what is it about cats that makes them feel safe? Why does a seemingly indifferent creature become an emotional refuge? Perhaps this isn't really about loving a pet. Perhaps it's the way your nervous system is quietly finding a path toward rest. If that sense of safety doesn't come from the cat's behavior, then where does it truly come from? Perhaps you don't love cats because they're cute, but because they don't force you to react. They don't require you to be cheerful. They don't demand that you show up in any particular way. Research in neuropsychology suggests that people with more sensitive nervous systems tend to react more strongly to social pressure and constant stimulation. They aren't tired because they're weak, but because they are always adjusting themselves to fit their surroundings. So what happens when they are near a being that asks for nothing, that doesn't need to be pleased, that doesn't require explanation? Perhaps it is in that quiet space that their nervous system is finally allowed to loosen. No guarding, no bracing, just simply being at rest. When the nervous system has been allowed to soften in that quiet space, another question begins to arise. Why does this feeling seem so rare in human relationships? Is it because most interactions around us carry an unspoken expectation? You have to respond. You have to care. You have to show something so you won't be misunderstood. Psychological research shows that people unconsciously create pressure through their gaze, their tone of voice, and their waiting, even when they don't intend to. For those with sensitive nervous systems, that is enough to trigger a prolonged state of alertness. So what happens when you are beside a cat? It doesn't need you to say anything. It doesn't read into your emotions. It doesn't seek validation. Perhaps it is precisely this absence of expectation that allows your body to feel safe for the first time, and your mind to finally stop being on guard. And from that rare sense of safety, a major misunderstanding often appears. Is it because you like silence that you are cold, hard to approach, or in need of no one at all? But psychological data suggests the opposite. Many people who love cats are not lacking a need for connection. They simply become exhausted when connection comes with too much stimulation and expectation. According to surveys on personality and the nervous system, these individuals often have higher than average emotional sensitivity. They feel deeply, but they also tire more quickly. So what do they choose in order to protect themselves? Not withdrawing from people, but moving toward relationships that do not stretch the nervous system to its limits. Perhaps loving cats is not a form of emotional withdrawal, but a clear-minded way of preserving enough energy to keep loving at all. So if it isn't emotional withdrawal, then what is really happening inside them? Research in behavioral psychology suggests that people with sensitive nervous systems often need more quiet space to self-regulate. They are not avoiding connection. They simply need regular pauses so they don't become overloaded. In a world where everything constantly demands a response, from messages to social media to relationships filled with expectation, being beside a creature that doesn't require you to prove anything becomes a rare form of rest. So is loving cats a choice for comfort or a choice for the survival of the nervous system? Perhaps for them, it isn't a preference at all, but the body's way of finding balance so they don't lose themselves in a life that has become too loud. And when you understand that, another question slowly comes into view. What happens when society constantly asks you to be present, to respond quickly, to express emotions at the right moment, and to always be ready to connect? Research on stress and the nervous system shows that continuous stimulation makes it difficult for the body to return to balance. Heart rate stays higher, tension lasts longer, and fatigue appears even when you haven't done anything particularly demanding. So when you are beside a cat, a creature that doesn't push, doesn't demand, doesn't interpret your emotions, the body is finally allowed to stop being on alert. Perhaps what you are searching for is not loneliness, but a kind of connection that doesn't drain the nervous system. And in this noisy world, that may be a very legitimate need. And because of that need, people who love cats are often the most misunderstood. Is it because they speak less that they're seen as distant? Because they express less that they're assumed to be indifferent? And because they need personal space that they're labeled hard to approach? But psychological statistics suggest otherwise. People with sensitive nervous systems are not lacking in emotion. They simply process emotions in depth rather than expressing them constantly outward. They observe more, they feel more carefully, and they are more selective in how they connect. So what happens when society measures connection only by loudness, by frequency of appearance, by speed of response? Perhaps their quietness is not an absence at all, but a different form of presence, less performative, yet more enduring and more honest to the needs of their own nervous system. So if that quietness isn't a problem, perhaps what really needs to be reconsidered is how we define connection. Research in social psychology suggests that people don't bond with one another simply through frequency of interaction, but through the feeling of safety in being themselves. Not by saying more, but by not having to brace or perform. So what makes cats a symbol of that kind of connection? They stay close to you without intruding. They are present without controlling. Perhaps that's why people who love cats often feel recharged in silence, rather than drained by constant interaction. And if that leads them to live more slowly, more quietly, that isn't a deficiency, but a different rhythm of life, one that fits their nervous system more naturally. And when you look at it this way, another perspective slowly comes into focus. Perhaps loving cats doesn't say much about what kind of person you are, but rather about how your nervous system needs to be cared for. Psychological research shows that people who are easily overwhelmed emotionally often seek out low-stimulation environments to restore inner balance. They are not avoiding people, they simply cannot sustain connection under conditions of constant strain. So what happens when quietness is no longer seen as weakness but recognized as a survival strategy? Perhaps then, people who love cats will no longer be labeled as distant, but understood as those who know how to listen to their own limits and are grounded enough not to cross them, no matter how loud the world becomes. So after all of this, how else might we understand the love for cats? Perhaps this isn't really a story about pets, but about how people are trying to survive in a world saturated with stimulation. As psychological research shows rising levels of stress and mental overload, seeking out spaces, relationships, and beings that make no demands becomes a very quiet form of self-protection. So if you feel at peace when you're beside a cat, ask yourself this: what in this noisy world is leaving your nervous system so deeply exhausted? Perhaps you are not distant, not cold, and not lacking connection. Perhaps you are simply listening to your body at the right moment. If these words feel like they name something true in your experience, share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes understanding begins when we dare to speak aloud the parts of ourselves that are usually kept private.